This is a summative review of Unit 5, the Antebellum period through the Civil War. Essential information. Who were the key leaders of the Civil War? Abraham Lincoln was President of the United States during the Civil War and insisted that the Union be held together by force if necessary. The Union and preservation of the Union was the most important. Jefferson Davis was a former U.S. Senator who became President of the Confederate States of America during the Civil War. Ulysses S. Grant was Union military commander who won victories over the South after several Union commanders had failed. Robert E. Lee was Confederate General of the Army of Northern Virginia. Don't be confused by the northern part. Virginia, remember, was part of the Confederacy. So he fought for the South, for the Confederacy. Lee opposed or was against secession, but did not believe the Union should be held together by force. Remember, his home was in Virginia, so he fought for his home against what he believed was unnecessary force from the federal government. What were the major military and political events of the Civil War? First, of course, was the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860, followed by the secession of the several deep southern states and the southern states that feared Lincoln would try to abolish slavery. First confrontation of the Civil War, again, was Fort Sumter, South Carolina in 1861. The Emancipation Proclamation, which we'll talk about more in just a minute, was issued after the Battle of Antietam, which was in Maryland in 1862. And then in 1863, you have a major turning point in Pennsylvania at the Battle of Gettysburg, where Lee lost about a third of his army. And then finally, the war will end in Appomattox, Virginia in 1865. This is where Robert E. Lee will surrender to Ulysses S. Grant. How did the ideas expressed in the Emancipation Proclamation support the North's war aims? First, it freed those slaves located in rebelling states, in those states which had seceded from the Union. It doesn't free slaves everywhere, but it does make the destruction of slavery a Northern war aim or goal. It discouraged any interference of foreign governments like the British, which had abolished slavery before. So the British will not side with the South after the North has issued the Emancipation Proclamation. And it allowed for the enlistment of African American soldiers in the Union Army. Recall the role that we had talked about Frederick Douglass playing in this, of sovereign states. That it was a civil war about the Union. It was to preserve the Union as a nation of the people, by the people, and for the people. Lincoln believed that the Civil War was fought to fulfill the promise of the Declaration of Independence and was a second American Revolution. In that way, it was a struggle to dedicate a different vision of the United States, to dedicate us to the idea truly that all men are created equal. What was the war's impact on the home front for women? Women managed homes and families with scarce resources. They faced poverty and hunger, and they assumed new roles in agriculture as their husbands left the farm. They also took up nursing, as depicted here, and participated in war industries as men went off to fight. What was the war's impact on the home front for soldiers? For the common soldier, warfare was brutal and camp life was lonely and boring. Warfare often involved hand-to-hand combat, and we often see these in accounts from diaries and letters that were written from home about the realities of war. After the war, especially in the South, soldiers returned home to find their properties destroyed, as you see here, and poverty. Soldiers on both sides lived with permanent disabilities that crippled them. Remember, we talked about the incidents of amputations due to the nature of war and medical treatment during the Civil War. The surrender will take place at Appomattox, Virginia in 1865. As depicted in this painting, both Robert E. Lee for the South, Confederate general, and Ulysses S. Grant, United States general, urged a handshake, reconciliation, friendship to be restored between the North and the South after the war was over. However, when we look at the next unit with Reconstruction, there's a lot of repairing to do. The Southern states were left embittered and devastated by the war, particularly Richmond and Atlanta, which were burned by either Grant or Sherman. Farms, railroads, and factories were destroyed throughout the South. Confederate money was worthless. Richmond, Atlanta lay in ruins, and the source of labor was greatly changed due to the loss of life during the war and the end of slavery with the 13th Amendment. The South would remain backward and agricultural based and a poor section of the nation for decades to come. In contrast, the North and the Midwest emerged with strong and growing industrial economies, laying the foundation for sweeping industrialization throughout the nation, other than in the South. And the next half century and the emergence of the United States would be a global economic power by the 20th century. Part of this development will be the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad soon after the war, and it will help intensify the movement west. We'll talk more about the movement west in another unit. Please review the slides, understand the importance of the Civil War and the people who participated in the war.